Alright everyone, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is December 19th, and basically I'm recording this video as a follow-up to the last one I made for Sun Square Neptune, because I had set aside a certain Nietzschean aphorism from the gay science to read, and I had just recorded over an hour, and I figured I needed to pace myself out. But then it feels like they just had to have this incomplete idea left lingering. I might as well include it. So, I mean, if you want, if you haven't seen the first video that I did for this transit, Sun in Sagittarius squaring Neptune and Pisces, you can go ahead but I mean, maybe this can stand on its own as a, but if you want the whole context, watch the other video, right? To give a bit of a recap of how I'm approaching this, is the Sun stands for the light of consciousness, the light of awareness, right? And the ideal of the Sun as a kind of form of higher consciousness could be, looked at in a spiritual or a religious or a hermetic occult perspective. Or it could also be seen as a kind of archetype that's there in the Enlightenment, right? Not just Enlightenment as in a Buddhist Eastern Enlightenment, but the Western rational Enlightenment of, the Renaissance of, science, rationality, reason, and the idea of this kind of so the Neptune, in contrast to this, there's an interesting interplay where, if you look at the way that the history of this all happened, is that you had coming out of, you had a kind of a mixture of science and the occult, where even Newton himself was an occultist, right? A lot of these old guys who were making these breakgrounds in physics were also dabbling in magic and occult and all this kind of stuff, and there ended up being a kind of a separation where now we have this thing called the rational sciences on one hand, and we have distinct from all this sort of like mystical woo-woo kind of stuff that people don't take seriously, right? And there's an appeal towards this whole thing of scientism, that we're pro-science, we believe in science, we don't believe in superstition and old wives' tales and all this kind of stuff, right? And but there's often a kind of back and forth, because it was interesting that, like, after this wave of the rational enlightenment, and you had people like, there's also this kind of desire, there's a certain thing of like rebelling against the church institution that kind of went with this as well. And for me, this is kind of awkward, because it's like, depending on how you're socialized, it was something that I think this is one of the influences the internet had in my life, was that I was socialized a certain way with the community that I grew up in and the family that I was raised in, who had certain kinds of values. But when you're online, you get exposed to people with different kinds of ideas and stuff like that. And there was a kind of like the opening up to just different perspectives kind of made me question the this kind of stubborn insistence on a kind of a cold, rational, scientific depiction of like the higher mind, of higher reason, over superstitious beliefs and old-fashioned things, right? Neptune, if you look at the Sun-Neptune dynamic, Neptune was discovered in the 19th century, around the time where there's a revival of spiritualism, of the New Age and stuff like this. And I was using this, well, not even using this. There's something that happened quite separately from me doing astrology, is that I have some friends that are into the Gurdjieff work, basically, right? And the Gurdjieff people want me to recruit some people to study Gurdjieff stuff, to do some Gurdjieff book clubs or whatever, right? So that I have not had requests flooding in for that yet, but the offer is open if anyone's interested. But there's something about this sort of like revival of spiritualism, or a revival of the esoteric, or this kind of, sometimes people make this into like left brain, right brain thing, where there's the rational mind that's all scientific and reasonable, and this kind of like superstitious, intuitive, that believes in, there's these things about like ghosts and spirits and gods and demons and all this kind of stuff, right? Where people, there's some kind of, people believe in science as being a freeing us, liberating us from these old superstitions, so we're not beholden or bound to some thing that doesn't really make sense ruling our lives. And even Karl Marx kind of played off this with saying that religion, it was the opiate of the masses, right? That because we believed in a afterlife, that you could you're not going to, because you believed in an afterlife, some other after your death, you'll be rewarded for being a good person. So instead of trying to like maximize your life that you have, you're living a meek and modest, humble life, to not threaten the power structure, not threaten the king and all this stuff. And it kind of acts as this docile tranquilizer that just makes you docile and easy to control and all this kind of stuff. The same archetype could also be seen in the painkillers, right? Or the idea addiction to things which put us in a kind of tranquilized, numbing state. And it could actually be, I've heard some people say that before religion was the opiate of the masses, but now opium is the opium of the masses, right? So, or there's the same Neptune dynamic could apply. The Jungians often talk about how, addiction could actually be the craving for a higher spiritual reality that's been lost in our materialistic society. And because you're surrounded by people who tell you that God doesn't exist, that it's all just superstition, that there's no external force that's going to help you, then why not just go to the bottle for comfort, right? Why not just go to your addictions? Why not just and if it's all just basically chemicals, right? If you're just a chemical machine and it's just you take chemicals to feel good, why hold back from just indulging in all the chemicals? Because you have a daddy in the some sort of sky daddy who tells you you're a bad person for being too indulgent. If there's no person to tell you not to, there's no higher reason why not to just indulge. Why not just become a drug addict? Why not just become a pervert? Why not, or what, you know what I mean? Like, what's the reason for morality if not to have a higher moral order that we call God or something like that? If it's all just science, we need to have a scientific reason why to do things, why not to do things. If there's no scientific reason, why not to indulge or to become or like there's some kind of so there's this kind of, I don't know. I'm just in all this. I'm just the conversation around addiction or the search for the transcendent. What I'm noticing is that we've been having this a mystery drone invasion, right? There's this whole question about the UFOs, whether we're having UFO sightings in America, or whether this is a kind of a military psyop, or whether this is a foreign espionage or something like that. There's a certain ambiguity around what is actually happening, and there's a possibility that this is a illusion or a spectacle that is being put on intentionally to deceive people, or intentionally to sow confusion, to sow or there's, what I'm noticing is that I have to admit that I kind of got into following this, but I noticed that even following the news cycle, I start to develop a habit of looking for UFO videos to try to, like every day you can be like, go on the internet and be like, oh, I wonder if there's any good like drone UFO videos on, and you get this sort of dopamine, addiction of like this kind of pleasure reward. Or like, the hunter who's seeking some sort of thing. Oh, look, I found another cool, your dopamine reward system's all pinging off because you're finding all these UFO videos and you're getting addicted to it, right? So that even it's creating a kind of media spectacle, which itself could be addictive, which itself itself could have a kind of like opiate of the masses effect to lull you into a kind of hypnotic trance state where you're just kind of, you're not paying attention to other things. This is a classic device of stage magicians, right? That they put on a little thing to get your attention so that you don't see the actual mechanism of what they're doing as their magic trick, right? And so this whole thing that they're doing with the drone, the mystery drones and stuff, could just be an elaborate stage distraction so that you're paying attention to this spectacle, you're not seeing this other stuff going on, right? And that the other thing about it though is there's also the it's not, when reality tends to be sometimes kind of mundane and boring, we may be motivated that we want to believe in UFOs and aliens and all this kind of stuff, and that may provide a kind of glimmering promise or something like that. Maybe there's more to this shitty situation than just that. The sort of brutal, mundane, material reality. Maybe there could also be dangling this tease of some sort of transcendent truth that, or whatever, right? Or like as they say in the X-Files, the truth is out there, right? Now, the whole question about this is the whole thing about aliens really true? Is this whole thing going on a constructed lie or illusion or a spectacle? And then also underlying this, there's a basic kind of Gnostic dualism where, this question of the everyday reality that we take to be real, is that the real thing, or is that just a kind of a daydream that we're in, right? Which can be, you can look at this from a mystical perspective of like the Maya, of the illusion of reality, or you could put it in a context of a kind of a Cartesian dualism, where Rene Descartes famously suggested that like how all our senses, do we take them to be accurate of the world around us, or what if our whole perception of the world is a trick, a lie, that we're being tricked or something like that, being deceived? And so there's this kind of question of like, if the real everyday world, that the consensus reality that we all exist in and that we all agree on is in fact actually real, then that, in order for that to work, there needs to be a kind of a metaphysical principle that allows everything to be coherent and sensible and rational, and not just a bunch of chaos, right? Whereas when you look at what's going on with the UFO thing, it's sort of chaotic because it's not plainly obvious whether it is in fact alien stuff, or whether this is a military psyop, or whether this is foreign espionage. No, there's kind of an ambiguity over what the actual truth is, and in that gap between the agreed upon consensus reality and what could possibly be the truth, there's quite a large gap that is could be filled by a lot of speculation, a lot of paranoia even, or a lot of maybe, hope and stuff like this, right? And that got me thinking that I have been approaching Friedrich Nietzsche, and there is a specific thing, like Friedrich Nietzsche is famous for this idea of the will to power, right? And unfortunately, the will to power is quite often misconstrued in how Nietzsche is represented. But I mean, if you actually spend more time, I mean, I'm going to assume that I've got a smart audience that's more mature and but who knows? I have to admit, this is the kind of thing, I'm interested in philosophy, but I admittedly there's a lot of people that are like younger than me who are much more well-read, much more academically inclined, and I'm kind of like an amateur when it comes to philosophy, and I'm just reading my first Nietzsche books now, and I'm gonna turn 40 in a few years, so I'm like a middle age, approaching middle age, approaching philosophy, all this kind of stuff, and I'm not, I'm an amateur. It is what it is. I'm an armchair philosopher. I'm a autodidactic, kind of person. Anyways, I'm going to read this thing from Friedrich Nietzsche. It's not that long, and I'm going to maybe comment on it a little bit. But this is a particular Nietzschean aphorism that stands out to me, and is an interesting contemplation for what the Sun-Neptune dynamic, I think. It's aphorism 344, titled "How We Too Are Still Pious." And this has to, what I was trying to say with the will to power is that this is kind of the will to truth, right? Is underlies science, right? That the whole premise of science, or the archetype of the sun, of enlightenment, is that you could apply this to religion and spirituality and mysticism, of the search for a higher mystical spiritual truth, or you could apply this to the rational sciences as the appeal to the scientific appeal to truth, right? But then also this sort of question of like the dangers of deception, and what if there is a will to deceive, right? So I'm going to just read this. Okay. How we too are still pious. In science, convictions have no rights of citizenship, as one says with good reason. Only when they decide to descend to the modesty of hypothesis, of a provisional experimental point of view, of a regulative fiction, they may be granted admission and even a certain value in the realm of knowledge, though always with the restriction that they remain under police supervision, under the police of mistrust. But does this not mean, if you consider it more precisely, that a conviction may obtain admission to science only when it ceases to be a conviction? Would it not be the first step in the discipline of the scientific spirit that one would not permit oneself any more convictions? Probably this is so. Only we still have to ask, to make it possible for this discipline to begin, must there not be some prior conviction, even one that is so commanding and unconditional that it sacrifices all other convictions to itself? We see that science also rests on a faith. There simply is no science without presuppositions. The question whether truth is needed must not only have been affirmed in advance, but affirmed to such a degree that the principle, the faith, the conviction finds expression. Nothing is needed more than truth, and in relation to it, everything else has only second-rate value. This unconditional will to truth, what is it? Is it the will not to allow oneself to be deceived? Or is it the will not to deceive? For the will to truth could be interpreted in this second way, too, if only the special case I do not want to deceive myself is subsumed under the generalization I do not want to deceive. But why not deceive? Why not allow oneself to be deceived? Note that the reasons for the former principle belong to an altogether different realm from those for the second. One does not want to allow oneself to be deceived because one assumes that it's harmful, dangerous, calamitous to be deceived. In this sense, science would be a long-range prudence, a caution, a utility. But one could object in all fairness, how is that? Is wanting not to allow oneself to be deceived really less harmful, less dangerous, less calamitous? What do you know in advance of the character of existence to be able to decide whether the greater advantage is on the side of the unconditionally mistrustful or the unconditionally trusting? But if both should be required, much trust as well as much mistrust, from where required much trust, but if both should be required, much trust as well, much mistrust, from where would science then be permitted to take its unconditional faith or conviction on what it rests, that truth is more important than any other thing, including every other conviction? Precisely this conviction could never have come into being if both truth and untruth constantly prove to be useful, which is the case. Thus, the faith in science, which after all exists undeniably, cannot owe its origin to such a calculus of utility. It must have originated in spite of the fact that the disutility and dangerousness of the will to truth, of truth at any price, is proved to it constantly, at any price. How well we understand these words once we have offered and slaughtered one faith after another on this altar. Consequently, the will to truth does not mean I will not allow myself to be deceived, but there is no alternative. I will not deceive, not even myself. And with that, we stand on moral ground. For you only have to ask yourself carefully, why do you not want to deceive? Especially if it should seem, and it does seem, as if life aimed at semblance, meaning, error, deception, simulation, delusion, self-delusion, and when the great sweep of life has actually always shown itself to be on the side of the most unscrupulous polytropoi. Charitably interpreted, such a resolve might perhaps be a quixotism. This is like, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but this is like a reference to Don Quixote. Quixotism. A minor, slightly mad enthusiasm, but it might also be something more serious, namely a principle that is hostile to life and destructive, will to truth. That might be concealed, it might be a concealed will to death. Thus the question why science leads back to the moral problem. Why have morality at all when life, nature, and history are not moral? No doubt, those who are truthful in that audacious and ultimate sense that is presupposed by the faith in science thus affirm another world other than the world of life, nature, and history. And insofar as they affirm this other world, look, must they not by the same token negate its counterpart, this world, our world? But you will have gathered what I am driving at, namely that it is still a metaphysical faith upon which our faith in science rests. That even we seekers after knowledge today, we godless anti-metaphysicians, still take our fire too from the flame lit by a faith that is thousands of years old. That Christian faith which was also the faith of Plato, that God is the truth and that the truth is divine. But what if this should become more and more incredible? If nothing should prove to be divine any more unless it were error, blindness, the lie? If God himself should prove to be our most enduring lie? So there you go. That's the Nietzschean aphorism. And I think it's sort of like, I just feel like this is sort of resonant with what's going on with the current Nietzsche has become very popular since the Donald Trump era began. We had the break with Biden, but even in the, we've had all these questions about a post-truth reality, a post-truth society, where there's basic things that we in this context of a post-truth reality, we have this idea of superstitious belief, or things that you believe in to make yourself comfortable, like an opiate of the masses, like it could be Neptune, right? This thing that seems like it promises you some sort of salvation, it promises you some higher understanding, but it could just be an illusion, a delusion, something that you believe in that's not real. And that in that context, we prop up science as being the thing that we aren't into superstition, we're into science as being this thing that gives us a will to truth, right? A will to truth that we can count on science for providing us. But what Nietzsche is saying is that, couldn't you have use science to deceive people? What if instead of using science as a will to truth, you were going to build a bunch of things that look like UFOs, fly them around, freak people out, scare them, and then have mass hysteria, and then use that to manipulate and control people, right? I mean, that's just one possible interpretation, right? There's but this pretense of science is there to protect us from this. Science, because we can use science to discern what's true and what's false, and underlying this, there's a higher truth, a one coherent reality, in spite of all these attempts to deceive us that our vision of science is aligned to. But the question Nietzsche is saying is like, does science is science necessarily have to be aligned to that? Right? It could be conceivable that you use your scientific industry to develop illusions. So it becomes like Wizard of Oz, right? We don't use science to follow the will to truth. We use science to follow a will to deceive people, because maybe it's in our economic interest to keep everybody deceived, or to create all these false impressions, or to create all these illusions to get people to do what we want, because it's in our interest to have people do this, not do that. If you put the will to truth above all these other interests, there could be inconvenient truths. Right? Like, I mean, the climate change thing. It could be very inconvenient that climate change, or not just climate change, but hole in the ozone layer. Any number of environmental problems. It may just be more convenient not to believe in them, and to deceive people, to think things another way, so that we have some kind of power, we have some sort of advantage. Right? So there's this kind of question, is like, how can you guarantee that a will to truth isn't corrupted by a will to power? Or can you? Is there any guarantee that the will to truth of science is not corrupted by lower power drives? And then if you look at history, and history is basically just a bunch of warring nations competing for power over another, or the natural world, animals in a kind of jungle survival setting that are where, if you're an animal in the jungle, it could be, to your advantage to wear camouflage, right? You do not advertise that you are a potential lunch for somebody, but to when you spread your wings out, it looks like you're a big scary thing that, like, people, these or you can hide as you can make yourself look like a stick insect on a branch, and that they can't see you, right? That in survival, if our will to power or will to survive is more about deceiving or tricking people, and this is basically what evolution is based off, who can survive. It's not, evolution in the natural world isn't based on who has a better apprehension of truth. It could be who is better at deceiving each other, right? And that if your own will to truth is to understand that you're just a mortal thing, that you're not going to survive, or that if our will to truth sees that, eventually the sun's just going to blow up, or that eventually we're going to deplete all the resources on planet Earth, and all this kind of stuff that or there's all these sort of inconvenient truths that. Are we dedicated to a unconditional truth, an unconditional will to this objective truth that is there despite all our conditional, subjective self-interests? What is the real truth that's going on, and we're committed to that? Or do we just want to believe what's convenient for us? What I tend to get the impression of is that people just want to believe what helps them. People just want to tell themselves a story that makes it easier to get up and do the same thing day after day, to support the role that they have in life, to make that work for them, to make that easier for them. But that could be a bit of a fiction. It could be a helpful fiction. But do we want helpful fictions, or do we want to put a will to truth above all these fictions, right? And the thing is, what is it about science that makes it absolutely necessary that science is aligned with the will to truth, not the will to be Wizard of Oz and to deceive people? Is there anything inherently about science that makes it like that? And the thing is, if science is like, we're not going to take any of these religious convictions, we have to prove we have to use science to prove that the will to truth is what it should be doing, or do we just take that as an a priori principle that just on default we're going to use science in service of this will to truth? But why? Can you answer that question? Why do we have to do it like that? Why, or what guarantees that it's not just going to be used to deceive people, right? So, and then you look at what's going on with the American government, or what's going on with these spectacles in America, with what's going on with these UFO hearings. Like, how can we guarantee that this whole thing's being put on in the spirit of a will to truth, to let people know what the real true event is, rather than just a mass deception? Do we have any guarantee at all? Right? We don't, basically. We don't have that guarantee. We don't have the guarantee that we're putting all this money into a military industrial complex that's supposed to blah, 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 or like a scientific thing that's supposed to enlighten us and educate us and all this stuff. How do we know that all this stuff is just not being, we're just creating a mass deception machine so for the interests of certain people who are in power that are doing that because it's useful for them, because it serves a utility to certain people over others, right? We don't have any guarantee about this at all, right? And the thing is, but still we live in a culture where people like Richard Dawkins or something are held up as like, oh, at least we're not slaves to the superstitions and the of unreason and all this. We have the science that can protect us from being deceived, and we can be smart and all that. But how do you know that the powers that be are not just using this to fuck with people all the time, right? I don't know. I might be getting kind of like creative with how I'm interpreting this, or like how I'm applying to the current context. But you see maybe you can see where I'm going with this, right? But this is still an underlying kind of thing that, like, if you get rid of this religious faith, religious belief, which is the belief on a transcendent truth, meaning that, think about this, you've got a transcendent truth that is independent from any self-interest to survive, to live or die, to have your own self-interest and your own thriving and being productive in society. That what if there was the highest truth was basically inconvenient to all those interests? Would you still seek that truth anyways, or would you seek something that would be utilitarian, to be practical and pragmatic for you to do what you want as a person, on Earth, so you can have your little all your self-interests are met, and that you can have technology to help you do these things, right? Like if that, and then so we have a conflicting interest. We have our own self-interest, and we have the will to an objective truth that is completely independent from any of our self-interests, right? And so when you're saying that you're pro-science, that are you pro-science because you believe the vaccine is going to help you and your family safe from a virus and all that? Like, no, you're into your self-interest. You don't want to get sick, and you don't want to die. You don't want your family to get sick and die. You like, it's not really. What if there was some sort of transcendent truth that didn't have anything to do about your own self-interest of how to guarantee your own survival? That there's some thing that is just like you don't want to deal with, so that you have Jesus Christ there to deal with it for you. Jesus Christ gets to sit on the cross, and then you get to like have this thing that you believe in that is, and call it a will to truth, when it's really just self-serving your own pragmatics, your own utility. You know what I'm saying? Do you get the problem? I don't know. This was just the rest of my idea from the last video. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening. And yeah, maybe this is a bit different than your average astrology video, but yeah, I don't know. This is part of why I find Nietzsche kind of interesting. Anyways, thanks for watching.